Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we are stepping right into the dark to break down a seriously fascinating case study. We're looking at a chilling narrative that brilliantly walks this tightrope between a visceral, in-your-face horror encounter and deeply tragic folklore. We're analyzing the anatomy of a ghost story, specifically looking through the lens of the now infamous Eden Hill School encounter. As we go through this, we're going to break down exactly how suspense is built, how our brains react to sheer terror, and how local legends are actually born from unimaginable tragedy.
But, before we even touch on where this all comes from, I want you to put yourself right at the climax. Have you ever been walking outside at night and you suddenly feel that primal, electric urge to just run? That absolute, sinking certainty that you are being hunted in the dark? Well, that is exactly where our story ends up, echoing with a terrifying distant scream. She is here. It is a moment of sheer, breathless panic. But how does a completely ordinary evening escalate into a nightmare of that magnitude? How do we go from the mundane to the supernatural?
Okay, let's dive into this. Part 1. Late night exam prep.
Now, the architecture of a truly terrifying encounter, it almost always starts with something completely mundane. Our narrator was just a student, right? Just grinding through final exams in a library kept open until midnight. It's an incredibly relatable premise, but it leads to what we can call the vulnerability trap. At 6 p.m., they arrived, safe, productive, surrounded by people. By 8 p.m., which is the time they'd usually head home, there was still safety in numbers. But because they were so deeply absorbed in their work, they inadvertently pushed way past that safety window. By 10 a.m., the vibe had drastically shifted. They had slowly, unknowingly slipped into complete isolation, and the security of a bustling school was replaced by absolute silence.
And it's right in the middle of that thick, heavy, absolute silence that the environment just shatters. Our narrator was completely zoned in on their studies when a sound cuts through the quiet, and it wasn't a normal footstep. It was the distinct, uneven, really unsettling sound of someone limping. Just imagine the sheer panic of that sensory shift. In an empty, echoing library at night, an irregular, dragging footstep is exactly the kind of anomaly that instantly triggers your fight-or-flight response. The narrator didn't even wait. They immediately packed up their books and fled the room.
Which brings us to part 2, an unnerving walk home.
So our narrator practically sprints out of the library, right? But the familiar school environment has morphed into something entirely threatening. The goal is simple: just get to the exit doors. But as they're quickly moving down this dim corridor, they see a woman standing all the way at the end. The narrator has no idea who she is, but this profound, creeping sense of discomfort washes right over them. It gets so overwhelming that our exhausted narrator finally calls out into the hallway, "Who's there?" And the second those words leave their mouth, she vanishes, just gone in a matter of seconds. They sigh a breath of relief, chalk it all up to exhaustion and hunger, and finally push out through the front doors.
So they pushed through those doors expecting, instant relief. Normally, this street right outside the school is completely bustling, full of life and movement, even late at night. But stepping outside that night, the contrast was horrifying. It was strangely, entirely empty, dead silent. The safety they expected to find by simply leaving the school just wasn't there. The nightmare hadn't stayed inside the building. It had followed them right out into the world.
Moving on to part 3, the twisted encounter.
Picture this. They're speed-walking down this deserted street, panic completely taking over, head down, desperately trying to get home. And suddenly, something literally impossible happens. From right behind them, where there was absolutely no one standing, a strange shadow stretches out across the ground. When they finally lifted their head, the woman was right in front of them. Up close, the visceral horror became undeniably clear. She was moving with this disabled, painfully slow gait. She was wearing tattered, dirty clothes, her hair was messy and wild, but most disturbingly, her hands and feet were physically twisted. The sheer unnaturalness of her appearance stopped our protagonists dead in their tracks.
Then, the entity actually asks a strange question, and we hit this profound moment of just frozen panic. My brain went numb. That perfectly captures how pure, unadulterated shock literally overrides your logical thought. The narrator couldn't speak. They couldn't utter a single word. When you're confronted with something so entirely outside the realm of natural logic, the human brain simply shorts out.
But hey, survival instincts are a wild thing, right? Completely frozen in shock, totally unable to even answer her strange question, they were driven by pure terror. So they silently raise an arm and point far, far away into the distance. It was a totally desperate misdirection, just wanting her to go away. And it worked. The twisted woman limped toward where they pointed until she was finally out of sight. And the absolute second she was gone, the narrator ran as fast as humanly possible.
Now their brain is solely focused on finding help. A car, a person, literally anything. They are sprinting wildly through the dark. And then, piercing through the night air from far, far away, they hear that woman screaming the very words we started with, "She is here." The sheer terror of that realization, that this entity was actually hunting something, or someone, pushes the narrator completely over the edge, and they black out right there on the concrete.
Which takes us to part 4, The Legend of Agatha.
So when the narrator finally comes to, they're safe. A neighbor had actually found them passed out on the street and brought them home. But that relief? It doesn't last long, because the neighbor ends up revealing the terrible truth behind that twisted figure on the street, tracing the origin of the nightmare back to a very specific year, 1998. By grounding this supernatural encounter with a specific date, the whole story pivots. It's no longer just a terrifying anecdote about a late-night study session gone wrong. It becomes historical, deeply rooted local folklore. The monster in the dark is given a history, and it is a heartbreaking one.
The neighbor laid out the heartbreaking facts. Her name was Agatha. She was 32 years old. And the inciting incident of this haunting is just devastating. Her 10-year-old daughter, who actually attended Eden Hill School, was playing with friends when she suffered a fatal accident. Agatha, completely unable to bear the horrific loss of her child, was forever bound to the tragedy. These details entirely recontextualize the terrifying monster we just saw on the street into a shattered, grieving mother. So Agatha's ghost is an entity that is forever roaming the Eden Hill School and those surrounding streets, endlessly searching, hoping against hope to be reunited with her lost child. This perfectly illustrates the duality of the absolute best urban legends. Because on one hand, it is deeply, viscerally terrifying, right? A twisted spirit limping in the dark, screaming for her target. But on the other hand, it is profoundly heartbreaking. It's an eternity of grief, literally locked into the very concrete of the school grounds.
It really is an incredible narrative, showing how profound grief can twist into absolute terror in local folklore. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over the next time you find yourself walking alone at night. Knowing what you know now about Agatha, her tragic loss, and her terrifying, desperate search, if you heard an uneven limp dragging through the dark behind you, would you look back? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating case study with us today, and keep questioning the shadows.